So here we are, campaigners for justice in Manchester. And you, like me, have to be able to go back and win arguments. We have to be able to win arguments in our churches, in our communities, in our schools, in our colleges. We need to win arguments if we're going to win the battle for justice. And to win arguments, you need to know facts. And that's partly why we're here today, to give you the information to go back to the churches and to your communities to win the arguments that will enable us to further the cause of justice. So much information there from Alvin that you can use in the arguments that you need to win. Tax, the only way in the long run that developing countries will be able to stand on their own 2 feet. That's at the heart of our tax campaigning, right at the heart of it. We don't want to see countries in the future dependent on handouts, dependent on aid. If you don't want to see that, if you're a right-wing conservative out there, this is about winning arguments, you're a right-wing conservative out there and you're questioning the aid budget, well, we question the aid budget as well at Christian Aid because we'd like to see an end to the aid budget in the long run, because we'd like to see countries standing on their own 2 feet, which is why the Conservative Party needs to start taking seriously the issue of tax justice. And as campaigners for justice, we have 3 characteristics that we can deploy as we go out there to win the battle. We can deploy our optimism, our impatience, and our persistence. We are optimistic for a better world. Fair trade did make a difference. Many of you were involved in that campaign as we lobbied supermarkets to stock fairly traded goods. There was a time, only 20 years ago, when the only place you could buy fairly traded tea and coffee was the Tradecraft stall at the back of the church or in the Oxfam shop. And now it's on every supermarket shelf the length and breadth of the country because people like you went out and badgered supermarket managers. Don't let people tell you that campaigning doesn't work. Mars, the 3rd biggest chocolate manufacturer in the country, has now said, as of last week, that they will be using fairly traded cocoa. So Maltesers in future will be fairly traded, delivering real gains for the world's poor through fair trade. Campaigning works, fueled by our optimism. It's also fueled by our impatience for a better world. A world not in the future, but now. We are impatient. Christian Aid used the strapline for many years. We believe in life before death because we are impatient. When I worked for the anti-apartheid movement, our president was Archbishop Trevor Huddleston. And in his declining years as he aged, he became increasingly worried that he would die before apartheid was ended. And he used to come into the offices of the anti-apartheid movement, he used to shuffle in, and he used to berate us in the nicest possible way to work harder, to do more, to get an end to apartheid before he expired. And to do this for a period, he used to tell this story over and over again to the staff and to the supporters of the anti-apartheid movement. He'd been up to Mirfield, the College of the Resurrection, where he was based in West Yorkshire. And he'd been sitting at the supper table and discussing with his fellow octogenarian members of the order the pros and cons at such an elderly age of buying a new suit. When from the end of the table up piped the oldest member of the Mirfield College to say, new suit, I worry about buying green bananas. So as campaigners, we are right to be impatient with the current world order. And we'll deploy our optimism and our impatience, but we will also deploy our persistence. We know that the climate change talks in Durban are unlikely to lead to a deal which will end the problem of climate change. But we will be persistent in going on and lobbying our politicians to try to achieve a change at the international level, to see a plan put in place to tackle climate change. And we partly do that because we know as citizens of this country that we bear an historic responsibility for the creation of climate change. Climate change was made in Britain, here in the Industrial Revolution in cities like Manchester. The dark satanic mills is where climate change began, and we bear a responsibility to do our best to tackle it going forward. So part of today is about holding our politicians to account on the promises they've made to be the greenest government ever. But we also need to hold our business leaders to account. Don't forget them in the equation when it comes to tackling climate change. So we will be optimistic, we'll be impatient, and we'll be persistent for justice. And part of what Christian Aid does is to work as part of a wider movement. So we're not just here today on our own as Christian Aid. As we meet here, CAFOD are meeting in the Catholic Cathedral in Salford, and Tearfund are meeting at the Friends Meeting House in Manchester City. And we will all come together in the cathedral this evening to worship together. And then we will go out from the cathedral and we will process through the streets of Manchester. If we do not process, there will be no witness. In many ways, the third and final part of the day, the procession through the city centre to the Conservative Party conference venue and then to Albert Square for the vigil, is the most important part of the day. Yes, we can learn here. Yes, we can worship together. But unless we're seen on the streets together as Christians campaigning for a better world, campaigning for justice, campaigning for a plan from our politicians to tackle climate change, then we will not have borne witness. So today we will deploy our optimism, our impatience, and our persistence as we work together, as we campaign together for a better world, so that one day, a day not in the distant future, but a day close at hand, when all can be included in the feast of life. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.